we go. So let's have everybody sit nice and tall and just close the eyes. And we'll take this opportunity to come into awareness of the moment, awareness of the peace within, and come into a compassion for self and for all other beings everywhere. Come into a deep faith that all is as it is meant to be. All is for the greater good, for our growth, for our own spiritual awareness, and for the reconciliation of our own karmas as well as our shared karmas. And joining the hands together in front of the heart, we'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a breath in. Om. And then gently releasing the hands down and fluttering the eyes open. So I had a fancy little title for what I was going to talk about today, and it left me. I said it like 5 times to myself. I was like, oh, that's so good. Well, we'll do that. And then I was like sitting there talking, in the class and whatnot, and it left. So we'll talk about whatever comes to mind now. So what comes to mind now is basically this idea of Dharma and what Dharma is, and how we can recognize it, and how we can not try so hard to fulfill it, not try to force it, but to actually, instead of forcing, to surrender to it. And then to not judge it, either in ourselves or others, whether that be its process or its place currently in life. So we'll step back for a moment and we'll ask ourselves, what exactly is Dharma? What exactly is Dharma? Dharma is defined in a few ways. It's a Sanskrit word, and it is translated as duty, and it's also translated as way or path. So Dharma is your duty. Dharma is your path. Your path for what? Like to show up at work at 9 o'clock and stay till 5? Your duty, what? To be a citizen that abides by all laws? What is your duty? No. Your spiritual duty doesn't really have much to do with those things. Your spiritual duty is to be a servant to goodness, a servant to kindness, a servant to healing. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be at peace and happy, and may my words, thoughts, and actions have something to do with that. Your Dharma is to be peace. Your Dharma is to know the peacefulness within yourself and to rely upon that more and more and more, so that you rely less and less and less upon anger and violence and other similar attributes. So your Dharma is to awaken to yourself. That's your path in this life, and nothing else. And you awaken to yourself, and as you awaken to yourself, those other things come naturally. The kindness comes naturally, the love comes naturally, the faith comes naturally. Knowing where to be and what to be doing comes naturally. It comes naturally. It's almost a no-brainer, It's like, of course that's where I'm going to be. It's where I'm needed. And the being needed isn't the grasping after accolades or thank yous or anything along those lines. It's because you see suffering and your heart calls you to address that and to say, let this be a world with less suffering, and even less suffering. And let my thoughts, my words, and my actions have something to do with that. So that's Dharma. To be in line with your spiritual calling, to come to know yourself, and to allow the behaviors in this life, your tendencies, to reflect that knowing. There's another word, adharma. It's at an A at the beginning of Dharma, and it means not. To not follow your path, to not perform your duty, to not walk the way of self-knowledge. Adharma. And when we're behaving with egotistical violence, anger, hatred, when we are knowingly allowing ourselves to exist in a state of separation, in a state of I'm better or worse than you, then we are behaving adharmically or adharmically without dharma. And in yoga, we call that ignorance. Ignorance is the not being with things the way they are, not being with the truth, not being with what's actually happening, what actually is. And in the West, as I've said many times, we look at ignorance like a 4-letter word, like nobody likes that word. Don't call me ignorant, right? It's like, well, what does ignorant mean? Look it up in the dictionary. It means to ignore. To ignore. How many of you have ignored something? Every one of us have ignored something. Did it get you further along your path to ignore? No, of course not. It doesn't work that way. When you ignore it, it's still there.
And they keep calling back.
Then they keep coming back. Completely. Absolutely. I love the story, sharing the story of when I was a child, and I would have nightmares. And so this one night, it was kind of windy and stormy out, and I was very much afraid. And I was curled up in my bed with my blankets over my head. Because, when you're a kid, you're like, if everything is covered by the blankets, the monsters can't get you, right? So I'm like that. And I keep hearing this coming from the closet in my room. I shared a room with my mom, but she was a nurse in the ER, so she worked nights. So I'm there by myself. My grandmother's in her bedroom downstairs, and my brother is away at camp or something, and I'm hearing this. And it's freaking me out as a little kid, like 4 years old or something, maybe 5. So finally, I can't take it anymore, and I stick my face out of the covers, and I scream at the top of my lungs. Scared the bejesus out of my poor grandmother. She comes running up the stairs. What's going on? Are you okay? And I'm like, I'm scared. The monster's going to get me. She sits down on the side of the bed. She said, what are you saying? And I said, the thing in the closet, it's going to come out. It's going to get me. The thing in the closet. She's like, what thing in the closet? And I said, I don't know what it is, but it's mean and it's going to hurt me. And so she took me by the hand, and I fought the whole way, let me tell you. She took me by the hand, and she walked me to the closet door. And she said, don't be afraid, because until you face what's in there, you're never going to resolve it. And I stood there, and I'm still ready to run back under the blankets because it's the only safe place, And I'm thinking, I have my grandmother's hands going for the doorknob, and I'm like, oh. And she opened the door, and she turned on the light, and there was nothing there but a hanger against a drafty wall every time the wind blew outside. The state of that trepidation and fear is ignorance, because I was not willing to get up and look in the closet. Did I know better? I'm a child, right? And in some way, shape, or form, we're all children. But in spite of our childishness, there will oftentimes be an inspiration that says to you, open the door. The heart says, go ahead. Because once you know what the monster is, the monster loses its power. And oftentimes what we find is that there actually isn't one. But as long as you sit there and just let your egoic imagination run amok, the monster's going to get bigger and meaner, more teeth. Bigger and meaner and more teeth, bigger and meaner and more teeth. And eventually that's what will become your reality, is the monster. And then because of that, you will harbor a fear of all closets, because closets will become the hiding spaces of monsters. And pretty soon it won't just be the closet in your bedroom, but it'll be the closet everywhere. And pretty soon it won't just be closets, it'll be any enclosed space with a door that you don't know what's behind the door. It'll be the unknown. And pretty soon the unknown will be a monster in and of itself. When we walk the path of Dharma, we pull the coverings back. We open the door. And we recognize that there really isn't a monster there. Most times. But every once in a while, there's something. Something that could be violent, something that could be harmful, something that could need our attention. And by opening the door and exposing the truth of the matter, not only in some circumstances do we come to the understanding that there was never anything to be afraid of, now we can rein that energy back in and use it for good. But when there is something that causes us concern behind the door, now we know what it is, and we can address it accordingly. If we never expose it, if we never look at it, if we are never willing to open the door, then we will never know what we need to do. And we'll just keep hiding away from it. Does that make sense? Yeah? Yeah. So Dharma is not just this kind of really, cutesy spiritual hashtag. It's a path you walk. It's a way of being. It is being. And that's kind of like the practical application. If you move into the esoteric aspect of Dharma, Dharma is to be with the flow of the universe as it is. So that's the esoteric definition of Dharma. To be with the flow of the universe, unresistant as it is. Now imagine that for a moment in your life, being with your life, unresistant as your life expresses itself to you, for you, and with you. To be with what is. No. And it's not just to be with what is, it's also to have faith in what is. To have faith that all things actually are working toward the greater good, the resolution to goodness. And I know from my own life especially, because that's the only place I can speak from, that sometimes that's really hard to accept. To say that there are things that happen in life and this could happen for the greater good, what kind of BS is that? What kind of divinity would have horrible things happen on this earth? Well, divinity doesn't cause horrible things. Humans do. Humans with imbalanced egos do. But the realization is this, that no matter what the storm is that has arisen, it will subside. And when it subsides, there will be a goodness. It may not be that everything is peachy keen, that everyone is healed, that everyone sees the woes of their ways, but it will be that something good will come forward. And one of the examples that I always like to give when I'm talking about this is Sandy Hook. That those children who lost their lives that day, what an atrocity, what a loss, what a sadness. But the goodness that came out of that was the unity of the parents and their decision to show that these things can be handled in a different way, that we don't have to become a lynching mob, that we don't have to become a mob mentality, that we can actually become a peace and healing mentality together. So there is eventually a goodness, a peacefulness. And if we can place our faith in that outcome more and more and more instead of less and less and less, then that outcome will happen sooner rather than later because we have faith in it, because we put our energy into it. It's really great. You can sit here and envision yourself building a temple. Oh, I'm going to build a temple. It's going to have pillars, and it's going to have carvings, and it's going to have, let's look at this temple. Let's sit here and just imagine it, right? You can imagine away. But unless I actually do something to put it on paper, to design it, to find the people who could build it, to find the wonderful artists who can put the pieces together, and to locate the murti that wishes to be here, the statue that wishes to be, unless all of that work is done, then it's just an image in the mind and nothing else. Unless we do the work of peace, the work of Dharma, then it's just a hashtag. So we have to put ourselves to the work of it. Now, some people would say, oh, but in spirituality, you're not supposed to have to put yourself to the work of anything. I mean, what happened to non-doing? Don't be ridiculous. Non-doing, that is not what that means. And I've had so many students talk to me about this and say, I get confused when I hear the teachings on not doing, the non-doing, like we shouldn't do anything. Does that mean that when I see a turtle in the middle of the road about to get hit by a car, I shouldn't get out and move it? Should I just let nature have its way? And it's like, that's not what that means. It means whatever action you decide to take, you don't take egoic ownership over it. That, you get out and move the turtle if it's safe for you to do so, and then don't expect accolades for it. Don't run around and tell 10,000 people, guess what I did? I'm such a good person, right? Am I not such a good person? Don't get invested in the story of it. Just do the good deed and move on. There's more good deeds to be done. There's more kindness to be needed. There's more moments for healing. So don't get caught up in the idea that, hey, I designed this. Because really, I didn't design this. Something else designed it. And I just said yes. I'll be the facilitator. And then I'll find the other people to facilitate. But if I ever just stop at this, then the other things that need my attention won't have them. And that sounds like, to me it makes sense. It's like, don't spend too much time on any one thing, because there are many things that need you. But also, don't be so flamboyant that you run from thing to thing to thing that nothing ever gets done. Don't pay only part of your attention. If you're going to invest in your self-healing, in your Dharma, then do so fully, 100% with absolute awareness. And don't allow yourself to be distracted, disturbed, or affected by outside things. Rein it in, take your energy, and apply it to that. And when that is resolved, then go to the next. Now, it's easy to say, do one thing at a time. We never do one thing at a time, really. There's always interactions happening on a multitude of levels, but really they are all still the same thing. They're all yet another opportunity for you to invest in faith and kindness and the resolution into goodness. So you really are still working on the same thing. You are still applying yourself to your Dharma. But students come and they say, I hate my job. I go to my job and it has nothing to do with yoga. Can't stand that. Don't like this relationship. It has nothing to do with yoga. Don't like going to the city. It has nothing to do with yoga. It's like, it has everything to do with yoga. All of it does. It all has to do with the yoga, the oneness, with the Dharma, the path, the duty, and with your own work spiritually. You're just learning the same lessons over and over and over again at different levels of being. You're like an onion. So many multitudes of layers of being. And you ever have a situation where you say, oh, I finally learned the importance of generosity. I was able to give this homeless person some money, and they went and they got some food, and their hunger was alleviated, and now I've learned the importance of generosity. And then tomorrow, somebody who you don't really care for comes to you and says, it was all I could do to muster myself to ask you for some money for gas because I'm stuck and I got to get to work. And you're like, I'm not giving you money. You didn't learn the importance of generosity. You learned how to dish generosity out preferentially, not unconditionally. So we have to take it another step now and say the Dharma must be applied and lived consistently across the board. So even though you think your job is pulling you in this direction and your relationship is pulling you in this direction and that person is going over there and this is happening over here, it's all part of the same pot of stew. And the more effectively that you can apply your faith and your walking of your dharmic path to it, the tastier the stew becomes. The more you understand the ingredients. And the more you have faith in the outcome. But the more that you feel that the rest of life is hindering you somehow, then the harder it's going to be to connect. Now, whenever I speak like this too, I always ask students to remember that life is really super complicated, and these are really wonderful concepts. And for you and I sitting here who actually have the tools, or some of the tools, necessary to actually pursue this, that's wonderful. But not everybody has the tools to see and understand it, to even this degree, ignorance. Not everybody has the tools to know that they can pull themselves up out of their own sorrow. Not everybody has the tools to even recognize that, that a broken knee doesn't mean the end of life as it was. Not everybody has those tools. So we can't judge them on their progress or place in understanding. We need to be a mindful witness and recognize that just as we need to learn over and over and over again the value of generosity, they too need to learn over and over and over again whatever it is that they're learning. Just like you and I have not gotten to the heart of our onion, neither have they. But their lessons look different. And why do their lessons look different? Because they're not you, and they're not me. Maybe they're like, they've got it down when it comes to generosity. They already know. They've learned. They embody generosity, but maybe something else has them. Where generosity is the lesson you need to learn in this life. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Everybody is different. So if you can hold space for other people, that's a blessing. If you can see and witness the suffering and the struggle of other people, do so. Without judgment. Because at the heart of the matter, it's their Dharma coming through. Right? At the heart of the matter, whatever they're experiencing is their Dharma waiting to be expressed. But first you got to get through the muck and the mud of it, right? First you have to get through the muck and the mud. The lotus flower is oftentimes used in yoga as an expression of the human experience. It's also oftentimes used as an example of Dharma. Because it says the seed, this little seed, makes its way to the bottom of a swampy area. And everything is against it. Something could eat it, something could break it. It's all kinds of bacteria around that could impact its ability to thrive. But this little seed makes its way to the bottom and takes sprout. And this tender little sprout makes its way through the mucky, murky water when there are animals around that could eat it. Again, bacteria that could attack it. All kinds of things happening. But it makes its way. It grows stronger and stronger every day as it is somehow invisibly guided toward the light of the sun. It grows up. It doesn't necessarily grow out. It grows up. The roots grow out. But the flower grows up, the stalk. It reaches the surface of the water, and the first leaf is laid down, and then the second leaf is laid down, and then the bud appears. And you ever been by a swamp? They smell sometimes, don't they? Yeah, they're stinky, right? And they're thick. And you ever get that swamp water on your clothing? It's hard to get it out because it stains. right? And then once you smell that, it stays with you for a while, doesn't it? It's like it gets caught in your nostrils, and it's like you're 2 days later and you're like, oh my gosh, what is that smell? It's like you have a little dot of the swamp water on your jacket or something, and it lingers for you a long time. But with the right conditions, with the sunlight and the right amount of rain and everything else falling into place, the bud opens up into a beautiful lotus flower. And there's one right there in the picture on the stained glass, a beautiful lotus flower. And it doesn't smell horrible like the swamp. It's not stained because of its environment. Its smell is like nectar. Its petals, they just have this ability to have anything roll off of them. The water rolls off of them. It doesn't stay there with them. They're unaffected, undisturbed, and undistracted by their environment. And they're called to blossom. That is their Dharma. Their Dharma is to blossom. And then following the blossom, guess what else their Dharma is? Their death. That the petals would blossom and show their inherent beauty, and then they would go away again, hiding. They would dissolve into the murk and mud of the swamp and become a, substance and nutrition for others. So this is seen as an example of human potential, that we're born. Some crazy way, something happened and you came into being. I mean, think that's like a miracle, right? That's like a miracle. I know science says, well, you have the ovum and the sperm penetrated the ovum, and then you had a baby. But what was there before the ovum and the sperm that became the ovum and the sperm? Can you explain that away? Of course not. No, we don't have words for that, right? But there is something there. And then the sperm and the ovum, and then the fetus, and then the baby, and then the teenager and the adult. And ultimately, what your heart is leading you to, what your Dharma is leading you to, is the blossoming of your very own self. To come to know yourself in fullness and completeness. And then, even as this physical body falls away, even as the moment of death arrives, that you do not lose that. That knowing of yourself remains. It's called the Atma Bodha, self-knowledge. And it's not self-knowledge like, I know myself, I don't look good in purple, I look great in red. No, it's not that. It's self-knowledge, knowledge of the innermost self, which came to be through the blossoming, through the following of the Dharmic path. Such a beautiful science, such a beautiful practice, such a beautiful faith system, such a beautiful spirituality, which centers around you and your ability to know yourself. And if you could muster for a moment the strength to completely accept right now where you are in life, and that this is all part of your growth, it's all part of your ability to come to know yourself. Think about how much stress that would alleviate. You wouldn't strive so hard for the things that don't matter so much. And instead, apply your energy, your willpower, your knowledge, your education, your tools, whatever they happen to be. Apply those to even greater understanding and the alleviation of suffering for self and others. We talk about that so much here, And why do we talk about it so much? Because just like the mantra, repetition is key. It's like, oh yeah, I get it, I know. It's like, reduce the suffering of all beings and things will be good. And then you go about your day and 2 minutes later, you're harming yourself or someone else. It's like repetition is key. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. And may I have something to do with that. May my life not be a hindrance to others on the path. May I not look at another person and be like, oh, my light shines so much brighter than yours. May I not have violent words, actions, thoughts toward others. May I not hinder them in their exploration in any way. May I give them the same grace that I would love to have offered to me. Dharma, in the most esoteric aspect, to be with the flow of the universe as it is, without resistance, with acceptance and surrender. And then somebody will inevitably say, but what if I don't want to surrender? What if I want to fight for good? And it's like, well, I guess it all depends on how you fight. Do you fight dirty? Do you fight to kill? Do you fight to maim? Do you fight to harm? Or do you stand up and stand for? And there's a beautiful story about Mother Teresa. Somebody said to her, are you going to go to the protests for the Vietnam War? We're fighting against the war. We're going to stand up against them, all those horrible powers. And she said, no, I won't be there. And they're like, oh, what do you mean you won't be there? You're Mother Teresa. You have to be there. You have to fight against this. And she said, no, I don't fight against. I stand for. And there's a huge difference between those two things. Because one is loaded with violence, whether you know it or not. And the other is loaded with grace and an ability to see what is needed and to respond to that call rather than react. So the Dharma that we all share is to show up individually and together. And just because one person isn't showing up to the Dharma doesn't mean, at least in your mind, doesn't mean that they're not showing up in some way, shape, or form. And if that person is harmful to your physical person, to your mind in some way, shape, or form, then you don't have to keep company with them. You don't have to throw your arms around them. You don't have to put yourself in harm's way. That's not spiritual. That's not spiritual. Just like you don't have to take a brick and drop it on your foot to prove that you can endure pain. The greatest spiritual teachers have said, the flogging, the self-flagellation, is that the right word? Yeah. The flogging of the self, that's violent. That's violence. What you're teaching yourself is that you have to hurt yourself in order to prove yourself. Nope. To be able to utilize willpower to endure discomfort is much different than applying the discomfort to begin with as a way of proving yourself. Don't you think? Those are two totally different things. One is faith-based. It's a faith in goodness. It's a faith in necessity. It's a faith in the essence of the truth of the self being greater than what is being inflicted. That is out of your control. The other is self-degrading and failure in the making. And something that's going to lead to a sense of inner misery. I must always be punished. I must always be punished. I must always be punished. Nope. Nope. There's a huge talk right now going on Facebook. I forget the group. But somebody posted a really interesting article about spanking a child. And they said, the person posted the article said, something to the effect, I'm going to paraphrase, something to the effect of, kids in today's world would be so much more respectful and would be so much more, in line with their duties and responsibilities if you gave them a whack on the butt every once in a while. I mean, I was spanked and I was fine. And everybody came out, just like they do on Facebook. It's like everybody has an opinion about this. And everybody's arguing the point, which, I agree. Don't spank your children. It's not purposeful. But here's where the logic is faulty. Most children were not well behaved because they were spanked. As a matter of fact, no child became truly well behaved because they were spanked. No, they became fearful of not being well behaved and therefore did what they were told. Those are two different things. If you hit the dog will become fearful of being hit and therefore will do what you tell the dog to do. Child is the same way. The adult is the same way. So violence is not the answer. Spanking the child is not the answer. Hitting the dog is not the answer. There's other ways to show responsibility. There's other ways to teach kindness. And the most valuable way to teach it is by being it. Kid comes home from school after punching another child, and so the kid gets punched and told punching is wrong. That's hypocrisy. That's hypocrisy. And hypocrisy leads to confusion. And confusion blinds us. And confusion blinds us to our Dharma and makes it so much more difficult. So much more difficult for us to break through those veils of ignorance and to see some semblance of the truth of ourselves. And not the truth that we've made a mistake in the past, and, or maybe we did smack our kid on the butt, but the truth of moving forward. I now understand that there are other ways and I don't have to revert to violence. Does that make sense? That makes sense? Yeah? Do a time check. Okay. Any questions or reflections right now? Yes?
So when you told the story of being a little girl afraid of the monster in her closet, it reminded me a lot of how those of us who experience deep trauma, whether as children or as adults, we choose to close the door to that rather than facing it and facing the pain because we don't want to relive or re-experience it. And we're taught in psychotherapy and through spiritual practice that the best way to resolve it is to face it and to accept it and to acknowledge and release it. But for many of us, our chosen way of coping is to run away and ignore it. I myself am guilty of that, and it ends up just sitting there and festering and growing until we become so fearful of any source of pain that we close ourselves off to all experiences, good and bad, and we become so reclusive because we just don't want to feel any more pain.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, you are absolutely correct. And the one thing that I would suggest, it's just a suggestion, is, we've all been guilty of a lot of things. Most of the time when we use the word guilt, it doesn't serve us well. It doesn't serve us well. So a long time ago, I made the decision to say instead, I've had that experience, and now I'm ready for a different one. Because otherwise, if I say, well, I'm guilty of that, then suddenly there's something bad or wrong about me to have been guilty. This is the psychology of language, right? This is the nonviolent language that we really do need to utilize for ourselves. Well, I've closed that door, I've had that experience, and I have learned that I have not grown from that I have actually even caused myself some stagnation. And my heart is so with you because we are sisters in that regard, we are. And now I'm ready for a different experience. I would like to know what happens if I open the door. Because I can guarantee you, if you open the door, it is no worse than keeping it closed. And there's even the possibility that it might be better. And isn't that alone reason enough. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else like to reflect or have questions? Not yet? Okay. So this idea, and we've touched on so many things, but hey, this is spirituality. It's messy, you know what I'm saying? It's like one of those potlucks where everybody brings in something. Yeah? It's not just veggie lasagna, right? It's like a mishmash of everything. But in conversations like this, it's important for us to keep in our minds the understanding that, you know, just because we wear a mala or a chakra symbol on our shirt, or just because we call ourselves spiritual seekers, does not make us spiritual seekers actively. I mean, we're all spiritual seekers, you know. But are we? Are we actively seeking? Are we actively working? Are we in the mess of it? Or are we just saying, well, you know, it's like I feed the hungry, so hey, I'm good. Are we minimizing the complexity of our humanness by only focusing on one thing? When the reality is that in our humanness, we need to look at all things. You know, it's easy to say, I'm a meditator. I meditate a lot. I'm a chanter. I chant a lot. I practice yoga asana a lot. I garden a lot. And all these things bring me peace. But if I cannot apply that peace to this injury, then I haven't really been practicing very effectively, have I? And don't get me wrong, I certainly have my moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, something's speaking, you know. I certainly have my moments where I'm thinking about Monday and the process after that. I would just be so happy when that moment comes. But if I can't be here with this now, then what has everything else really shown me? What has it given to me? So it's not enough to just meditate. You have to take what you learn in your meditation and apply it. It's not enough to practice yoga asana. You need to take what you learn in your practice and apply it, like those of you in the yin class this morning. Whatever you learned in there, whatever small bit it is that you carry forward with you because it resonated with you, now apply it. Now apply it. In as many ways as you can think of, get to the heart of the onion. Don't just settle for shallow. No. If you settle for the shallow onion, then you end up with that crinkly skin that doesn't taste good anyway. Right? You know what I'm saying? Right? Where does all the onion juice exist? Toward the heart. The nectar is at the heart. So go to the heart of the matter and apply everything that you learn about your own spirituality there. In every relationship, in every circumstance. Somebody's in line at the store screaming at you, cursing at you, calling your names. Don't react. Stop and say, spiritually speaking, what do I apply here? What do I apply here? What do I apply here? And that person will probably become so confused they'll just walk away anyway. But then that gives you an opportunity to be less reactive and more responsive. Because most of the times that we react, we don't really need to. We're just doing it out of habit. And then in the moments where you really need to react, do so responsively. So that your reaction is less nuclear. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And I know I saw a couple of you when I said, somebody's screaming at you, cursing at you. Shouldn't I defend myself? Against what? Against their suffering? You're going to defend yourself against someone else's suffering? How do you do that? I've had people call me lots of names in my life. And yes, there's definitely been times where I've called them names back and we both walk away feeling pretty crappy. It doesn't solve anything. But if a person is there and they're saying to you, they're calling you a name, they call you a liar, who cares? Let them. What does it matter? It's not your integrity that's at question. It's their suffering. And they're looking to lash out at someone. So just excuse yourself from the situation. Swami Shivananda was known for saying, what other people think about me is none of my business. What other people say about me is none of my business. It's none of my business. I don't need to hear it. Because I will never teach them otherwise. Their heart is the only heart that can change in their way of thinking. And I can't do anything to make that happen, genuinely make that happen. That's something that has to come from inside of them. So I can go back at them and be like, I'm not a liar. How dare you call me a liar? That's attack. That's a violence. I can go to them and say, really, I'm not a liar. I'm not. I swear to you, I'm not. Here's why. And I can justify myself. That's ridiculous. They're not going to be like, yeah, you're just trying to justify yourself. I can go to them and say, I'll give you money if you believe I'm not a liar. Right? Right? Would you give anybody money to believe you're not a liar? Of course not. So why would you give them your time and your effort also? Aren't those things just as valuable or more than money? Of course they are. So leave them alone. And don't worry about it. Let the gossip be what it is. Because just as they gossip about you, you have gossiped about someone else. And in your own suffering, you have called someone else a liar. And you don't have all the facts either. So, don't play that game. It's a waste of your time and energy. Instead, go within and ask yourself, spiritually speaking, what needs to be done here? How do I apply what I've learned so far? So that I can begin in a place of peace, move through seconds and minutes and hours somewhat peacefully, and arrive at the next linear destination in some semblance of peace. How do I do that? Once you understand what a moment is, yeah, that's why moment wasn't in there, because the moment is eternal. It's not linear. But the second, the minute, and the hour of the year, those are linear. From here to that door is linear, you know? But when we talk about the moment, you're always peace. Always. That's your foundation. That's your essential being. And then the waves are the ego. Right? I think we were talking about that last week, right? Yeah? Yeah. Yes, KP.
So, I think my overall question is really just how do you let go? Because I'm thinking in an argument that I have had where I understand what you're saying and I can apply it to that person. And there's always, and like there's still like a little bit of part of me that's just like, okay, well I'm trying to understand her perspective, but she's not trying to do mine. And then it's like, that doesn't matter. That's not important. But it's like, how do I let go of feeling hurt from what was said? Or like, how do I even let go of a relationship, whether it's I thought I had this relationship with them, or the relationship has since changed because of the argument, or maybe even just like the relationship is now over. Like, it's all just different variations of letting go. Mm-hmm. So how does one begin that part?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's like lots of different levels of answers to that. So many different levels.
Probably a whole talk.
So the first thing is we really place a lot of value right now into understanding someone else's perspective, right? Mm-hmm. This is like what we consider nowadays to be socially correct, is to really try to understand another person's perspective, but the reality is you can't. You will not understand the other person's perspective. Mm-hmm. What you can empathize with is similarity. Where does the similarity come from? Suffering. So when you say I'm really trying to understand her perspective, stop trying to understand her perspective and understand her suffering. Mm-hmm. That's number one. Number two, this letting go, is it a defeat in some way?
It's like, how can I move on past feeling hurt from what was said? Because like, I know what was said is not true, I know it's not accurate, and I frankly don't really care if that's what they think. Mm. But there's still a part of me that like, it's like a twinge of just like part of me wants to like say like, well, screw you for even thinking that about me, but fine, whatever, that's your story, I don't care. But then there's so much emotion in that I'm sure on some level I do still care.
So it's defeat.
Okay.
Right? So there's been a value that's been placed on this interaction that has to do with championing or defeating. And as long as we are interacting with other people and we're seeing that interaction as leaving us as either the champion or that which has been defeated, then we're going to fight for our life. Because even though there's a part that says, I don't really care what this person thinks, you do. If you didn't, then those words wouldn't be necessary.
Right.
What you could actually be saying to yourself is, I really wish I didn't care. I really wish that it would just be easy to just say, I don't care. But the reality is that I do care. And so acknowledging that may be a really great step, is saying, actually, I do care. And that's why this hurts. It hurts because I do care. And it hurts because I'm trying to understand her perspective, but I'm not seeing her suffering. So understanding that as long as we look at things in the light of, am I winning or am I losing here? Then we're always going to attempt to claw our way to the winning side, or we're going to tumult ourselves into the losing side. Just throw our hands up and give up. Neither one of those is balanced. Neither one of those is balanced. Instead, if you think dharmically and you think about this other person and say to yourself, well, their unwillingness and inability to understand where I'm coming from is a defensive mechanism because they're afraid of being hurt even more. How important is it really that this person understand me? Just as you can't understand her perspective or his perspective, can they really understand yours? How important is it that they do? I mean, is your life going to stop because they don't? It hasn't stopped yet. Is your life going to be a worse place because they don't? Probably not. You know? Is it going to be freeing to just leave them alone? And let them be?
Actually. I stopped talking. I essentially, what is that called? I'm just gray rocking it. And it's.
That's an interesting word. Never heard that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's, I remember learning in therapy, so if you have to have contact with someone who is toxic for you, I'll say, then, so for a lot of people who happen to be toxic, telling them more about your life can be
Toxifying.
Yes. So instead of saying anything, like if you have to continue having interaction with them, you just say like, how's your day? It's fine. What did you do today? Nothing. They just make your life super boring. Just answer like whatever they have to. Just nothing.
And I agree with that, but again, when we come into nonviolent communication with ourselves and with others, there might be a different way of saying that. And so the way might be to build boundaries.
Yeah.
And if the person comes up and says, you know, I was thinking about the conversation we had the other day, and I just want you to know where I stand on this. And, you know, the response to that can be, this moment is not the time for me to have this conversation, so I'm going to excuse myself.
Right.
You know, and in that way, you're not saying, I'm never going to talk to you about this. You're saying, right now, I'm not going to talk to you about this. And you can say that for the next 50 years. It's perfectly fine. Right? You can say that for as long as you want to say that. But it's not what can be misconstrued as, well, I mean, anything can be misconstrued. But it's not avoiding. It's saying, no, in this moment, I in myself, I don't have the skills to talk about this and feel attacked at the same moment in time, so I'm going to actively choose to excuse myself from this conversation, versus the short answer of nothing, which actually means everything. Yeah. So a few things is to stop worrying so much about understanding the other person's perspective from the place of absence of suffering. If you're going to attempt to understand someone else's perspective, then do it from the place of suffering. How do I understand this person's suffering and how that suffering feeds into their perspective of me? How that feeds into their perspective. There's nothing I can do about that. Anything I change about myself in order to make them feel more comfortable, in order to make them feel more comfortable, is violent to myself. Right? So I'm not going to change myself to pacify this person unless my behavior itself is violent. In which case, maybe I will have a moment where I can recognize that there actually is something about myself that could be less violent. But that's not what we're talking about here. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So stop worrying about understanding their perspective outside of their suffering and start looking at it from inside. And then this idea of letting go, understand that there's a difference between truly letting go and throwing the thing away. Putting it under the rug, saying, I'm a turkey, I don't see you, so you don't see me. You ever see how wild turkeys do that? They stand there, and it's like, you can't see me. You can't see me. That's not letting go. Those are just various levels of avoidance and disguising and getting rid of and, denying. So letting go is the acknowledgement, the heartfelt acknowledgement of we both suffer, and in that regard we are universal together. We're one. But your suffering comes from somewhat different circumstances and details than mine does. And it has led you to have other feelings and thoughts and perspectives on life than what I have. And while I can hold a space for those differences, I can't hold a space for the violence that they cause. And therefore, I'm not going to engage in this any longer because I don't wish to be violent. And I don't wish to feed anybody else's violence. That's kind of like that's the spiritual way of looking at it. It's not bypassing. It's not. Today's world, we've got so many misunderstandings in today's world. Spiritual bypassing is denial, right? Some people say, well, spiritual bypassing is when you don't stand up for yourself. It's like, but you have to understand what you're standing up for. Or are you just fighting against? Which one are you doing?
In that situation, I was standing up for myself in the sense where I wasn't allowing someone to yell at me about something I did not do and then to speak to me in a disrespectful manner.
Good. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Standing up for, not fighting against. Because people can say whatever they want to say. We fight against it. Well, they're not going to say that about me. It's like, they have a mouth, they can pretty much say whatever they want to say. Just like you can too, But the question is how are you going to face that? And then how are you going to let go of it? And I don't know, I find compassion and empathy to be the easiest way to release. A friend of mine, Dipti, and I'll finish with this. A friend of mine, Dipti, used to say, life is like a train. And she said, you get on the train at your stop. Train stops and they pick you up in Reading, Pennsylvania. And there's many, many stops for that train. And people are getting on and off at all different stops. And sometimes someone gets on the train and you're like, please don't sit next to me. Please don't sit next to me. And inevitably they either will or won't. Someone else gets on the train and you're like, oh, please sit next to me. Please sit next to me. And inevitably they either will or they won't. You have no control over that. They all get off the train eventually, and so do you, and you have no control over that either. The only thing you have control on is how you ride the train and how you allow them to come and go. And so you allow them to come and go with grace, or you allow them to come and go with other things. Even the people who are harmful. And then last thing I'll say, I fibbed one more thing. In yoga, we have faith in reincarnation. We believe the soul doesn't die after this life, that you do come back. And so if there's any truth to the idea that your deeds in this life define your next life, then the people in my life who I have encountered who have been horrific people, the ones who have really hurt me in my experience, I don't want for them to suffer anymore. Because in reincarnation, they come back in the next life in the same or similar condition, they're just going to keep hurting people. Suffering is going to deepen. I don't want that for people. I would never wish what happened to me to happen to anybody. So may they reveal to themselves the truth in this life. May they come to know themselves truly. Not just may they know the harm that they did, but may they know the truth of themselves, the truth, the Atma Bodha, the self-knowledge. May they have that moment of awakening in this life so that in the next birth, they're born into a saintly position, a position of humility and goodness, where they have some remembrance. Yeah. And in that way, I'm not contributing to the violence. That could be hard to say, though. It can be. Absolutely. And I totally understand that. That's because it hurts so much to be in a physical body. It hurts so much to be vulnerable to other people's misbehaviors. It hurts so much. It just does. But that is not who you are. Never was, and it never will be. No. Anybody else?
I have.
Yeah.
Suppose you hear this sound in the closet and you open the door and this terrible, terrible monster, and you have a terrible altercation and it's a terrible fight, and then you have the experience again. You open the closet and it's a terrible thing, and you learn about mania because that's part of what the monster has and is. You learn about borderline personality disorders, that's what the monster is, and you recognize the pattern. And at one point you want to not open up the door. Right. That's what I'm experiencing right now. So when my sister gets into her crazy place, where she's so vicious and she's so mean, I already know the pattern. She'll have 20 emails that and just a few hours, 3 hours of 20 emails, and they'll be attacking and they're crazy, they're her mania. I'm sitting right now with 20 unopened emails, and I don't want to open them because I don't want to open the closet. But then she, the next series will be you ignore me, you are a bad person because you ignored me, and I just don't want to open up those emails because there'll be violence to me. At one point I had a girlfriend who would open up the emails to let me know that if there's any content. And she's opened up 100 emails over the years, and she said, no, there's no content. And then occasionally there would be a content. You really need to know this about family. That's why they got read it all. But she just recently lost both of her parents, so I can't burden her with that. That is not on the. So I am sitting here with this closet, and I know there's a monster in it. I know there is. I know the pattern, and I'm not sure how much compassion I can have, or whether I should just let it go. But then it seems like ignoring your sister seems like a bad idea too. I'm stressed.
Do you recognize that the mania is not your sister?
That still isn't. I still don't know what to do.
Right, but do you recognize that? It's the hardest thing in the world to recognize. It's like having a parent with Alzheimer's, right? And a parent gets deeper into the progression of the Alzheimer, and they're calling someone by the wrong name, like they're calling their son the father's name, right? And everybody corrects them and says, no, mom, so-and-so, daddy passed away 2 years ago. And what do you mean, right? What use is there in correcting someone who cannot be corrected? What use is there? The Alzheimer is not the parent. The Alzheimer is the condition. The mania is not the sister. The mania is the condition. What good is there in trying to correct the sister when she doesn't even know what she's saying to you? So
she'll say, I'll bring it back. I'll bring this thing back, and she'll say, I never said that. She actually has no memory of saying these things.
Right.
She has no memory.
So why talk to her about it? You're not ignoring her by not opening the emails. So just kind of spending some time with that and working with the idea that what you are reacting to is the mania, which, if it were me, I would have some feelings about the way that is affecting my sister, this person who I love and care for so deeply. There can be a lot of fear there. There can be a lot of uncertainty there. There can be a lot of emotions there. that when you're not opening these emails, what you're saying is, I'm not going to interact with the mania. You can interact with your sister all you want. You don't have to respond or react to the emails. She sends you an email you don't want to open. You can simply send her back an email that says, hey sis, I love you so much. I'm in the middle of something right now. Can't read this email, but if there's something super important you need to talk to me about, let's get together tomorrow. Don't even read it, because they're not her words. They're the words of mania. She won't remember them. Tomorrow you see her and you say, hey, did you want to talk about something? Because I didn't have a chance to look at your email. Oh, I don't even remember sending you an email. Oh, okay, great. Want to go get some coffee? You see? You let each other right off the hook with that. Because if she's not going to remember, what is the use in correcting her? If an Alzheimer's patient doesn't know that someone has passed away, what is the use in telling them over and over and over and over again? They're not going to remember. That is the nature of that demon. They're not going to remember. So meet them where they're at. And if she's messaging you in a state of mania, then just message back and say, I'm in a place right now where I can't open this up and read it. So let's touch base tomorrow if there's something that you really want to talk about.
You don't even need to acknowledge that.
No.
Like, I don't. I know. I feel for all of you. My heart is like breaking out again. I'm in that space as well. Yeah, we need tissues back here.
There's tissues if anybody needs them.
But you don't need to reply, because then you're stepping in her space, and that's not her. You love her for her.
Yeah, and that's also absolutely very true. Thank you for saying that. You don't have to reply at all. You're not obliged to reply. But sometimes the words, the kind words, might break through something, but don't expect that to happen. But it's just a way, it's kind of like one step of you feeling like you are doing something productive while also getting accustomed to not reacting to what she's saying to you or what the mania is saying to you. Because it's not about you. It's not that what she says has nothing to do with you. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah. It has nothing, it really doesn't. It's so hard though, because we love people and we attach ourselves to them. And we attach ourselves to a certain perspective of them. We say, you always got to be who you are. You can never grow and change. That's not life.
If you could just pick them up and put them where we are, the frequency that we are, that'd be grand. That's just not the way that it is.
Yeah, exactly.
We're on the right journey.
Yeah. So start with that. Start by understanding that it's the mania is not your sister. That they're two different things. And then either don't reply to the mania, or if you do, only reply from a place of I love you and let's talk later. And in which case, it could be de-escalating for her. Trying to explain something to somebody who can't understand is escalating, right? This is like, education, special education 101 for at-risk youth. You don't try to explain to them what they're doing wrong because they're escalating. That's escalating them more. You put them someplace where they can de-escalate, and then, if it's appropriate. Or you just don't respond at all to those emails. Yeah, and I know you don't really know which ones are which, perhaps some days. Yeah.
Well, when the 20 comes to 3 hours.
Yeah, then you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you know.
But you said, I love you, Anne. What else are the things?
Oh, I love you. In this moment, I'm not able to read through this email. If there's something you really need to talk about, let's touch base on it later. I'm in the middle of something. And that step is mostly for you to feel like you're, kind of interacting, but eventually you want to be able to see very clearly what is your sister and what is not your sister. Just like with an Alzheimer's patient, you want to see very clearly, the difference between their memory, and the areas that they don't remember, and then not try to force those memories on them, because they're not going to take. Yes, Noelle?
So you said a lot of things that resonated. So I thank you for sharing your stories, because your responses were really good. And I want to take some of those with me, but she was asking for you to repeat what you said. So where is the YouTube that you're recording? Where is it going to be? Because I'd like to go through it again and hear some of the things again.
Sure. So this is always on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yeah, on our YouTube channel. And if you would like to have your because you shared so personally, if you would like to have your voices taken out, I can go and edit it and do that. Okay, thank you for that. Because I would only ever honor, your journey and your experiences and your words and thoughts and feelings. And I thank you so much for sharing, because that must be so challenging and so difficult to have to deal with that. But yes, it'll be on the YouTube channel. And I usually share it to my Facebook page too.
You did last time, that day. So I was like, is she going to start doing this?
Yeah. Oh, typically. Yeah, typically. Some days I don't get around to it, I guess, but every week they're posted. Except for the 1 week where I didn't hit record. It's recording. It's recording. But that's the starting place, is to take an inventory and to recognize, that the mania is not your sister and your sister is not the mania. It's like talking to two different people standing in front of you. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Thank you so much for your input and for also for your clarity and for sharing as well. I think everybody in here has had a loss, has had some type of a life situation, right? We all have, absolutely. And the more we can come together and support each other, the better off we will be. Yes.
I have a hard time letting people in. Okay. So this past year I've had some trauma, physically and mentally. And in each of these classes you said something that hit me. So I'm learning to deal with self-healing.
So important.
My sister has been a huge part of that. She's the first person I let in to know what was going on. So, and she's got me involved in all this.
I'm glad you have her. Yeah, I'm glad you have her. And you're resilient beyond your knowing. You really are. And, another interesting story, because we can only ever really talk about what we've experienced and how we come to understand what we understand. When back in the day I was diagnosed with epilepsy. Now, prior to that, I'm a super independent person, I'm super active, the whole 9 yards. And then here's this doctor who's telling me that, that these blackouts I was having was a form of epilepsy, and that I was going to lose my license for a period of time, and I was going to have to start taking medication and all these other things. And initially, I resisted. It was like hitting a brick wall. I was like, no, this is not happening to me. There is no way. This is not me. I do not have this. They're not taking my license. I'm not losing my independence. And I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not going to be labeled like that. And I'm so grateful that meditation has always played such a huge role in my life, because I recognized that I was escalating. And so I started meditating on it. And just kind of sat with this idea, okay, what is epilepsy? I mean, like, what is epilepsy really? And my situation is petit mal, not grand mal. So the little, it's like zoning out almost. It's not convulsions in the physical way. And I thought, well, I know what instigates them. I know what brings them on. Stress and fluorescent lights. For in my situation anyway. And I know some intuitive things to do to counter both of those things, right? And then I said, okay, but still I have like this period of time now where I've got to take this medication and, and I just came to the realization that this diagnosis was just, this experience, I should say, of this diagnosis, the experience of this, of epilepsy, was just another way to experience being alive. So even when I was in the midst of having a petit mal seizure, it was another way of experiencing being alive. It was another way of experiencing life. This is another way of experiencing life. You speed up, you slow down, you stop, you go, you rest, you activate. They're all different experiences of being alive. So that gave me, for some unexplainable reason, the ability to sit with that diagnosis and accept it. It's just another way of being alive. And so I would go to Whole Foods where, interestingly, these would happen quite often because of certain lights they had in there. And I'd be in the vegetable aisle and I would start noticing, and I would say, okay, so maybe when I come in here, maybe I need to not come in this aisle. Maybe I need to make sure that, I bring my husband or my kid with me or something and have them go down this aisle, because this seems to happen often here. Now I'm paying attention. Now I'm witnessing what's happening to me rather than reacting to what's happening to me. And I'm learning a lot about myself as a result. And not only am I learning a lot about myself, but I'm learning a lot about you also, and others, people, everywhere. And I'm learning how to be with that. So in this journey that you're on, give yourself the space to learn how to be with what you're feeling, to be with what you're experiencing, and do what you need to do to keep yourself safe, to reestablish balance and what we call homeostasis to whatever degree is possible. And whatever parts don't appear to be accessible, accept that they're not accessible right now because they're not serving a purpose right now. The things that serve the purpose are what are accessible. So if the injury is what is present right now, then that's where your attention is needed. So be with that compassionately and lovingly. Does that make sense? Yeah. I'm so grateful to you for sharing that. And also for you opening up and letting your sister in. It's important that we surround ourselves with people who can hold space, and just let us be without telling us how to fix ourselves. And nobody can fix us. We're not fixable. Nobody's got super glue to put us all back together in pieces, right? The doctors can certainly do some kind of physical stuff. But as far as the mental, emotional, psychological stuff, what we need is love. Love. And faith. That we are still okay. And we will be. Yeah. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're all here. Each and every one of you. Welcome back from Thailand. This is KP. KP lived here with me for how long? 2 years?
Almost, yeah, I think so.
Almost 2 years. She was my intern. She was my student intern, and she lived here for almost 2 years, and then she ran off to Thailand and had a life adventure.
I did. I had a whole life there, and then I left it all behind.
Yeah, and now she came home again for a little while.
Yeah. There are feelings there about that, but that's okay. We don't need to talk about that.
Yeah. Just have faith that what you're doing at home is what you're supposed to be doing. You're working through stuff.
Yeah. I have questions to ask you later, but that can be later.
Okay, that's fine. Let's sit tall. We'll close the eyes. Take a nice breath in, a nice breath out. And together we'll lift our voices in Om. Draw the hands together in front of the heart. Breathing in. Om. Jai Mata Di, Hari Om, and Namaste. Thank you all so much for being here today. So good to see you all. Now, they're serving what they cooked down there, and it smells pretty good. So please do go enjoy. And just let them know that you appreciate them being there in the kitchen. Linda, and I think maybe Michelle is down there with her today. Is she down there too? Oh, and Rachel's down there too? Wonderful. Oh, that's so special. So let them all know that you're full of gratitude for them. And for next week's class, I do intend on teaching Wisdom Circle next week. So if everything goes well and I'm back here, then that will happen. And Charles will probably, actually, is next week Mother's Day?
Yeah.
Oh, next Sunday, you're in for a very special treat, actually, because Jyotima is going to be here. We're having a Mother's Day retreat next weekend, which, if you're interested, there's still spots available. But we're having a Mother's Day retreat, and on Sunday, Jyotima is going to be leading the meditation at 8 a.m., and she'll be leading the yin practice at 9. So that's really beautiful. She's phenomenal. And then I'll be leading the Wisdom Circle at 10:30. So do come enjoy and have a great week. And if I don't see you, happy Mother's Day to all of you. Good. Thank you all.
Good luck tomorrow.